Welcome to the next section, um, software process engineering and related practices. I have selected a kind of a popular software development process known as an open unified process, which is a part of the Eclipse Process Framework. Hope many of you may have some experience of using Eclipse framework, and in the Eclipse framework, open unified process is in a freely available process model which we can use whenever we develop a particular software project. Before I move into the details about the open UP, would like to discuss some of the important things called the symptoms that what we can observe when there is a possibility for the failure of a project. Ad hoc requirement management. What does it mean? Requirements are there. We can sometimes, most of the time, we can identify the requirements. But the managing the requirement is the key thing. In the next section, we will discuss the requirement engineering. But the most important thing is not follow a different ways. We need to have a kind of a common set of practices within a project to manage these requirements. Ambiguous, precise, imprecise communication. Well, communication is important. But if this communication is not precise, if we cannot communicate the things to the different stakeholders in a precise way, and that will be a kind of an indicator. Things are designed, developed, managed around the architecture, as you will see the more details later when we start discussing. However, if the architecture is not stable, if things are changing, okay, if people are changing this core thing around which the development is carried out, then it is not a good observation or symptom. Complexity. Naturally, complexity goes up. However, if that complexity grows in a way that we can't understand, we can't control, that's not good because it affects the overall project. Requirements, design, implementation. Three things, but they are related things, as we know. But this relationship we should be able to identify with respect to each requirement. Okay, what sort of a way, how the design was done, how this is implemented. If they are not consistent, then that will be another problem. Testing, important thing to be done. As you all know, it should be something should be started or considered at very beginning. If people don't have good practices to put adequate effort for testing, it is not an excuse. Risk is unavoidable, but if we don't have the ways to overcome the risk, if we don't have practices which are around us to face the risk, not a good sign. Changes are unavoidable. At the same time, one change have a propagation to the other things. That means there is something which we can't control. So uncontrolled change propagation, not a good sign. So how do we overcome? Automation is a very popular term in these days. Important thing that gives us a kind of uh, way to simplify the development process. But if there is no adequate automations during the design, development, implementation and deployment processes, that's again not a good symptoms. The main reason to list these symptoms, because these are the common systems, but the open unified process which we are going to discuss will help us to address whenever we see these kind of issues in the software development project. So methodology helps us to control these kind of systems. So strong process development framework is very, very important, and which supports these key things as I mentioned in the previous lecture: iterative, incremental, risk focus, use case driven, architecture centric. So kind of key terms which we wanted to consider. Complete extensible architecture across different application domains and organization cultures. So what are these things? What do you mean by complete extensible? Complete means all the things what is required, the things is there. And at the same time, depending on the project, depending on the organization, we may want it to extend. Okay, so complete extensible architecture is important thing. Well, we may have a good process, we may have a good methodology. However, if the practices are bad, then other things may not be very important. When we talked about the practices, individual focus, individual practices are sometimes very important. Okay, because it's a teamwork, but if one person doesn't have a good practice, that affects to the other people. So at the same time, we may need to have practices as in a team. So those two focuses are especially discussed. What is the collaboration and cooperation? Two terms which we can see most of the time. Okay, collaboration and cooperation. There is another slide where I explain in detail the main difference, where a cooperation model, the client cooperate but doesn't undertake any responsibility during the cooperation. In a collaboration model, well, they are part of the team. So a good example is there to understand in general life. Also, if we wanted to work together, we need to go to a collaborative model. So the methodology support for that. So three things: unified, agile, community. Those are the three main things which highlights the unified, open, unified process. Yeah, let's next one to discuss some details about the open QP. Well, this is a a refinement of unified process, which I described in generally. So we go into the details and essential characteristics of the RUP, or Rational Unified Process. As I mentioned earlier, ancestor in the unified processes. So it was a proprietary. So people wanted to have a free things, and IBM worked out on one, and later unified process came, and today it's available as a part of the Eclipse Process Framework. And I suggest all of you to go to the website and download, and that's a free and better to experiment. If time permits, we are planning to give a worksheet and a practical session how we use the unified process. So the key terms, as I mentioned earlier, are there. So few words about the Eclipse Process Framework. UP is a part of it, yes, but this is an open source framework, extensible architecture, set of tools for software process engineering. I'm happy to hear the participants' experience about the EPF, and the forums are open for you to come and discuss them. And especially what we can see, it supports the iterative, agile, incremental development, and applicable to broad set of development platforms and applications. Eclipse framework has so many things, so that's one of the advantage. This process framework helps the people to go. Openup could be located as one of the key things in the whole ecosystem. That part we can see in the EPF, Eclipse Process Framework, as you can see in this diagram. If we go into a detail, what is this? This is the kind of a very shortest introduction, what we can say. An agile, inspired process with its roots in the unified process. So, as you know, the way things are changing, agile has become a kind of a good set. It provides a good set of practices and a different mindset for people to follow. But it should be integrated with a standard software development process model. So this could be considered as a thing. People usually would wanted to promote a collaborative software development. Okay, and that's the collaboration not only within the team, with the other stakeholders. So this promotes that. And there are three things which is highlighted on here. We will discuss more details about the three terms which is associated with the Openup. One thing called the minimal. So that means it contains the minimum things required in the development process, which are described with respect to the roles, tasks, and the guidance. And the minimum thing is enough to do something complete work. So probably not going to say it's a compatible and a large. We talked about a small project who work together, but later people can, another thing, if they want, they can extend the small model to serve as a foundation, but depending on the requirement. So minimum thing is given, it's complete, and if the particular organization wants, they can extend. That's the three features that what we can see in the open unified process. And as I mentioned earlier, it's an agile unified process that contains a minimum set of practices. Okay, so as you can see, when we go into the details, it's mainly practices what we talked, and that helps the team to be more effective in developing software. Agile and lightweight. What are those two things? What do you mean by agile and lightweight? Okay, so usually when I say an agile, it's a term everybody knows. Would like to give you an overall introduction, small introduction in the next slide. But opposite of a lightweight is a heavyweight. Why we call something heavyweight? Why we call something lightweight? Usually software engineers doesn't like to document things, and documentation becomes a managerial process, and sometimes you have lots of documents but things doesn't work. So at the same time, the documentation plays an important role. So here we put in a process where we wanted to develop a working system, and the documentation we are not going to neglect, but we'll develop once we have a working system. So what is the key thing that what we can observe in a agile thing? Communication. And that communication we wanted to build a shared understanding. Let's see in a kind of a small video which I took it from the YouTube, a very popular one. At the same time, very good to get an overview. We have a separate section in our course to discuss critically agile process, but would like to. What is agile? So let's
To be
see a
competitive
small
in today's
video.
fast-moving marketplace, organizations need to drive innovation in every part of their business. As a result, more and more companies are embracing agile development as a viable development methodology that delivers customer value faster in both information technology and across key business units. But what is agile? What does it do? And how does it live in an organization alongside traditional development practices? Well, to answer these questions, let's meet Mary, the owner of a small toy store with great products and clientele. Her store is so successful and popular that she'd like to start selling her toys online. As part of this effort, she wants to modernize the infrastructure of the store to support further growth. The problem is that Mary isn't sure how to manage this expansion. The two projects don't have a lot of similarities. Upgrading the store's infrastructure involves a number of different steps, and the infrastructure cannot be used until all of these steps are completed. Selling toys on the internet involves creating an online database, then letting her customers buy toys on a website or smartphone application. Unlike the infrastructure, her online presence can be rolled out incrementally and expanded as needed. The two projects will have at least one common resource. Mary has hired Luke, an IT professional, to upgrade her infrastructure and design the website. Mary uses a single tool to manage the details of both projects from one place. She takes a look at what needs to be done and decides to work on the website first. Mary's not quite sure what her clientele expects from a toy store website, but does know that she wants to start as soon as possible. Given this, she decides to manage the website's development using Agile. Agile is a development mindset focused on delivering customer value. This means that if you work in an agile fashion, you mitigate risk by continually sharing your work with your customers in order to validate that what you are building is what they really want. To do this, Mary contracts with Rajesh, a product owner who will work with a team to build the website using Agile Scrum. Agile Scrum produces the highest business value in the shortest time by developing products in an iterative, incremental manner. Each iteration or short development cycle is called a sprint. Each sprint is typically a few weeks long and involves requirements definition, product design, coding, and testing. The end result of every sprint is a potentially shippable product. So after the first sprint, Mary will have a live website that includes the functionality that she needs most. Each sprint after that will improve the website a bit more, incrementally building on top of each other. Prior to the first sprint, Rajesh meets with Mary. They use CA Agile Vision to document and manage her requirements in a product backlog. The product backlog outlines the project's timelines and priorities. Managing the product backlog is called backlog grooming. Requirements in Agile are called user stories because they are focused on what the customer or user needs. They are presented in a canonical form that emphasizes the customer. Once the product backlog is fully groomed, Rajesh starts a sprint planning meeting. Rajesh gathers his team together, and this includes Tammy, a Scrum Master, and the Scrum team. As Scrum Master, Tammy facilitates the sprint planning meeting. She also ensures that the project runs smoothly by removing any obstacles that prevent the team from doing their work. Rajesh presents the sprint's goal to Tammy and the Scrum team. The first sprint will focus on getting a basic website up and running so that Mary can start making money as soon as possible. The team reviews the prioritized product backlog and hones the user stories by asking the product owner for more details about them. They also size the stories in order to determine what stories will fit into the sprint. Tammy moves the high-priority stories from the product backlog to the sprint backlog. The sprint backlog defines the scope of Sprint 1. The team determines that they can work on 4 high-priority stories: creating a website, developing description pages for Mary's most popular toys, creating a checkout page, building a smartphone app for mobile purchases. Once the sprint backlog is complete, the Scrum team starts working on the user stories. Every day during the sprint, Tammy convenes the daily stand-up, a quick meeting where everyone answers 3 questions. What did you do yesterday? What will you do today? What obstacles are impeding your progress? Tammy records all progress in the sprint backlog. As the team does their work, she updates and shares the sprint burndown graph with the team. This graph highlights the progress made in the sprint and how much work is remaining. When all the sprint's work has been completed, the Scrum team presents the first sprint's deliverables to Mary in the end of sprint review meeting. After reviewing everything, Mary, Rajesh, and the Scrum team all agree that the website is ready to go live. Mary's toy store is now online. Now that customers can shop on the internet, Mary and Rajesh talk to them in order to get feedback on their experiences. This information is used to identify new requirements for upcoming sprints. As final action of the sprint, Tammy conducts a sprint retrospective meeting with the Scrum team. Here they systematically evaluate what worked well and what did not during the sprint, identifying what can be improved in the future. The retrospective completes the sprint. After that meeting, Sprint 2 starts and consists of the same process: sprint planning, daily stand-up meetings, the end of sprint review, and concluding with the retrospective. As the sprints continue, the team iterates to quickly and continuously improve the website until both Mary and her customers are completely satisfied. Using Agile Scrum to build Mary's website provided several benefits. First of all, Mary's website went online quickly, right after Sprint 1. While it's not everything that Mary wants, at this early stage, the website is functional, and more importantly, making her money. Secondly, Agile Scrum lets Mary be more certain of what she's getting. Since Rajesh continually asked Mary what she thought of the site's progress, the end result was closer to what she needed. Lastly, because Agile focuses on delivering customer value, it increases company revenue. Customer feedback was rapidly gathered and used to improve the website in later sprints so that customers are happy and inspired to spend more money. All this time, Mary has been tracking the progress of the Agile project with her project management tool. It also shows the progress of Luke's work on the infrastructure upgrade project, which is managed in a traditional manner. Keeping track of both of these projects is a lot of work. Luckily, her management tool simplifies monitoring details for different types of projects. Which tool is she using? Well, Mary did some research to figure out which program would best enable her to manage both Agile and traditional projects in one place. She chose CA Technologies' Project and Portfolio Management solution, which can...
So you can continue watching the the video, but if you go to the one, of course there are lots of tools. This is a commercial video developed for some specific purpose, but the most important thing, I wanted to show some of the common practices and these common practices are very useful when we designed unified process. So agile practices we can easily integrate it in the process model, as you can see in the other slides. Okay, let's move.